Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I just wanted to quickly say thank you so much to Alyssa and Derek for doing this. And Alyssa, I've admired your work for years, and I was so thrilled to have this show. And it's been such a pleasure to work with you. And I'm so moved by this new body of work. And I'm so excited that Eric is here to discuss it with you, and that you're allowing us to all listen in on the conversation. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. I just want to also say thank you, if that's okay, just to derail for a second. This is very meaningful for me. I mean, I've had a lot of shows and I've had a lot of good luck with a career that is just, I'm really thankful for to begin with. But this has been very meaningful in a way that I didn't expect. And I'm just so glad we got to do this together.
Yes.
We've both been in the same kind of space emotionally and mentally for the past year. And this work is very much about that. And it was just the right place, the right time, the right group of people. And then I got lucky and Eric said yes to me.
I got nothing to do.
You never do anything, Eric. You're just sitting around.
Just hanging out.
Eric is one of the most generous people on the planet, also one of the most smart people that I've ever met. And you probably all know that already.
It's not going well.
So I'm just very excited to talk to you today.
Yeah, no, it's great to see you. It's great to see the new work and stuff. I've obviously known you a long time, back when you were a little artist. Brand new artist, spanking new artist and stuff. And so always been an admirer of what you do. I tend to admire artists whose work I can't do. And yours is work I couldn't do. So painting I couldn't. I have no idea how you do it. And so, it starts with that. And then obviously that sort of interesting balance that I find in your work between an intelligent beauty and a sort of psychological complexity that has both emotional resonance as well as sort of metaphoric content to it. So it keeps spinning out in a very interesting way for me. And so I've obviously followed it for that.
Thank you.
In terms of talking about it, Alyssa sent me her statement, which was very interesting because she emailed it to me saying, here's my statement about my work. And then it started out with Alyssa Monk's I'm thinking, she's thinking in the third person here? What is going on? Who is this person now, right? So anyway, I substituted your name for your I do this, I do that thing. But what she wrote about her program for her paintings was so articulate that I certainly thought, why am I here? You say it so beautifully and intelligently that maybe you should start off by sort of telling the audience the way you think about the work.
Well, I have to just point out something that, so you called me out and said that I talked about myself in the third person. And one of the things that the work always has been about, and you called this out way 20 years ago, was about the self-objectification that women do, right? Mm-hmm. Where it's like, I'm presenting myself in a lot of these, and myself even in the ones that aren't of me. And this is a much more feminine way of making art than like the male gaze. There's no female gaze. The female is actually objectifying herself. And so I guess speaking of myself in the third person is appropriate in that regard. But we learn this as women, is to to take in what's around us as, being the male gaze, and then we look at ourselves and see ourselves, but also abandon ourselves and start to objectify our own self. And it's not negative or positive, it just is. And so that leads into what these paintings are like more about than even, when I was younger, they were so obviously about that. Now it's about untangling the pretzel that, women, some men, I guess too, also like wrap themselves into by trying to figure out how to navigate and control other people's experience of them, right? So it's not just Madonna versus Thor, or or Marilyn versus Audrey, or wife, mother versus career woman. It's trying to be everything all at once, all the time, in every single experience. And for me, growing up, the youngest after 6 boys, 1 sister, right? But 6 older brothers, there was a lot of that, like learning how boys are brought up and how they are going to see women. I was kind of their experiment. Like they could tell me like what a girl is supposed to be. And I took it all in and learned to objectify myself very quickly. And painting became for me about controlling that experience and making my own reality that maybe at first was just for me, but then became about whatever I wanted everybody else to understand about me. It became about wanting to be seen. And at this point now in my 40s, and having gone through the losses of 2 of my most important people in my life, I learned so much from how futile that journey is, to try to become a pretzel and control so many things, to try to control other people's experience. And then the reality becomes is that everybody is doing that. And everybody also thinks that they can see the clear thing, and they can't. So it's like all of this other stuff layered and layered and layered on top over the years. I keep putting more and more filters between the subject, which is essentially myself, and the viewer, and obfuscating this experience of myself. But it becomes more and more accurate because there is no actual self there. There's no actual experience to be had. It's just perception, perception, perception. It's all orchestrated. Not just me, I'm talking about everything all at once, all the time. And it kind of broke down for me in the lockdown, where I, just in my little studio by myself, painting away, watching the world just kind of unravel, all society kind of falling apart, and feeling like there is no reality that we've all agreed upon, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's whatever you want it to be. So I'm not the only one that has been constructing. I'm just doing it on purpose, in a way.
Let's say that the process of artists is to, one, hopefully early on discover their themes, and then spend the rest of their life exploring them, digging deeper, trying to find out whether there's a limit to it, to the theme, or whether it really is a journey that is a lifetime journey, right?
Right.
And so then you go through stages where, like you were just describing, where there's a revelation that happens, where you begin to see that one way you were thinking about it may not be the truth of it itself, right? That there's or you're holding on to something that wasn't working farther down the road, etc. So within the language of painting, how would you see those changes being manifest in your work? Because from very early on, you've worked with painting some kind of scrim between you and the viewer, something where you are both coming up to the surface merging, meeting the gaze of the viewer, and at the same time either melting back or frosting over, or, whatever. So it's that kind of ambivalence and push-pull for you. That was there from a very early on. So how would you say these works are sort of showing some of that other aspect you're talking about, where there seems to be some shaking up of that?
Well, I think back when I started, it was very important for me that they were of something real, like that it was a realistic image, a representation of something that you could see, even if it was a surprising experience of water and droplets and it warped the figure a little bit or the portrait. It still had to be something that you could find in your own house or your own experience. I think now I'm almost turned off by that. Like, I want to create something that keeps not making sense. Like it'll be like, okay, I see something here, but wait, now I don't know where we are again. I want it to be this experience of being completely lost and disoriented and take you in, to make you try to find where you are, but then you get lost again. Like, you can't totally trust me to give you a real.
You put that on each label.
Yeah.
This artist is not to be trusted.
Well, it's like when you look at like Hopper or Manet or something, like you trust that they are going to be consistent with what their illusion is, even if it's not completely accurate all the time. We just trust their language. And that's always like a good thing, but I feel like now I want the experience of getting lost. I find myself more and more attracted to abstraction than anything else, and that there's something emotional about that.
One thing that I've noted, one in myself, but also more broadly in artists, is that realist artists long for loosening up.
Yeah.
And schmeary artists long for tightening up.
Yes.
As though there's something in that. A schmear. I'm going with schmeary on that one.
Do you long for being more tight?
I have gone through periods of tightening up, trying to sort of master that and whatnot. Ultimately, going back to something more closer to my real sense of, both the pleasure and the experience I'm looking for in a painting. But I notice it's something that all painters share in their anxiety towards the thing they do, and actually towards the thing they do best, right? So that part of the process of being an artist is living with that doubt of your own strength, right? As though that you need to question that in order to get to a deeper truth. But
I don't think of it as a strength, though.
what do you think of it, a controlling mechanism?
Yeah. Like it's, I feel like painting too tight sometimes can be a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was warned about that. I think it was actually Vincent Desiderio at the end of the Academy program said, no, be careful, because you could become a renderer and just render and lose sight of the
reason why.
Yeah, the reason why, the experience of it, the getting lost in it, the going into places that are unknown and experimental and finding things you didn't expect to see that you're surprised by because you've gotten so good at solving the problems with your hand, so that you can render anything, and so that has always been in the back of my mind because that's what I wanted to learn how to do. That's why I went to the Academy to begin with. Mm-hmm. I wanted to become somebody who could paint anything perfectly, as convincingly, as realistically as possible, in the hopes that that would make me a serious painter.
Mhm.
You know, in my little 20-year-old head, that meant, you know, I would be taken seriously. I don't know why that was what was in my head, but it became less and less interesting the more and more I learned how to do it.
The more and more you mastered it.
So now, you know, and I do know painters who want to be more loose. I've taught painters who want to loosen up.
Sure.
And so I was always cognizant of trying to figure out a balance between that. I like to call it the Dionysian and the Apollonian tendency, you know, where there's a more emotional, instinctive, intuitive, you know, non-linear thinking component with a tighter Apollonian, systematic, formulaic, logical space. Because I think having both is interesting and surprising and plays with your head a little bit more, whereas too much of one or the other is kind of, I don't know, a little less exciting. But I think your work gets there almost perfectly all the time. You know?
It does.
It does. I don't think anyone would disagree. No, I mean, because you have an efficiency.
Joking aside, the goal of the artist is to make it look easy, right? The goal of the artist is not to bring the audience into all those levels of doubt, confusion, frustration, you know, et cetera, that we go through in the privacy of our own studios,
I
right?
want everybody to see that. You don't want everyone to see
You
that.
want to
That's what that
show
is.
the
This
mess.
painting is all about
Well,
that.
I'd like to talk about this painting too, because this being the most different, in a way, there's a couple of paintings in here that, based on what you've been talking about, offer ways out of what you've been talking about, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of it has to do, you know, more and more the presence of the brushstroke, the more assertive physicality of the surface as a paint language itself has come in, and this one being the most sort of extreme in that case, is one thing. The painting over here of the flower that has created a fracturing surface where the, you know, even though you didn't paint a fractured glass, you painted it in a way that it seems like the whole thing is cracked, right? And that too is another way to deal with what you're talking about, where you know, fragmentation becomes a real part of the thing. There's somewhere you're pushing, pulling the image, you know, in and out of focus type of thing, but something like that takes on another level of sort of image obliteration, but still within the physicality. But this painting almost says, why does the figure have to be there? Right? That this one has a lot of the language of presence, absence, of surface and receding. All those things are in here. Still with the faintest figuration attached to it, right? It's almost as though in this painting, the next painting would even remove that, right? Kind of that's what it's kind of pointing towards, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You know, if that were your ambition, but
Yeah, it's a little scary, but yeah, that is what I want to do.
yeah.
That is what I want to do.
Yeah, I'm not recommending going that way. I'm just noticing that that was pointing in that direction of something where the painting itself becomes, you know, its own physicality, its own reality, and shifts from the illusionistic back and forth. You know, there's like this painting behind you,
Yeah.
where you know, there's an image there that you struggle like hell to put together. Sort of has that also going in it, as opposed to the one next to it where the image is very clear and whatever. So
Yeah, I haven't fully solved the the riddle. But I think it goes back to that whole managing, curating others' experiences, like, I like painting like this. I mean, I also like painting like that. I like to see the image appear and come to life,
Nobody
but-
could do
I
that
like
if they didn't enjoy doing that.
Well, I mean,
It's like the what it takes to actually make that. If there's no pleasure.
there's moments that are very pleasurable, but there are moments that are tedious too. I mean, there's a lot of it that's tedious, whereas this feels very visceral and like energetic, and it feels like it's like dancing as opposed to walking a tightrope. They're just different kinds of sensibilities. But
I have an idea for the second painting that's going to lead to this new breakaway.
Okay.
Do the same painting, only have her turn and walk away.
Yeah.
See her from behind. See if she's no longer interested in coming to the surface. It's like you're a free woman.
No, I have played with losing the figure more and more and abstracting it more and more and more. I mean, and like in this one. And then, you do lose a little bit of the empathy. You lose a little of the psychology. I mean, I do. I don't know. So
that's an interesting.
It's always playing with how much of the portrait do you need? How much of the figure do you need? And what does the figure have to be doing? And then how much of the paint can actually speak all by itself as gestural strokes. And then the color also for me is a huge character in it. The color is so probably more on purpose than definitely more on purpose than the facial expressions is the colors that I'm choosing. The facial expressions kind of don't even happen until the end. I don't know what they're going to be until the painting's finished, and I'm like, oh.
Can you
that's what's
bring us into that moment? I assume that the face would have been somehow drawn in at some point prior to finishing it. You're saying the feel of the mouth, the feel of the eyes and stuff shows up later?
Yeah, so I noticed years ago I made a portrait of my mother in the shower with textured glass. It's actually the painting that my sister has in her house. And, it's from the same one, but it's not that one, it's the
Did your sister raise her hand?
That's my sister, everybody.
Okay, good to know. You just keep pointing. You could be anybody out there.
Oh, my sister. But this painting I made of my mother, where the textured glass and the water and the steam kind of obscured her expression just enough that depending on how I felt, I could read it a different way myself. So I'd come into the studio and sometimes that same painting would be looking at me like, oh, you're so sweet. How are you doing today, sweetie? Next day, she's like, I'm very disappointed in you. I know what you did last night, And I didn't do anything. The painting hadn't changed. And I found that to be really interesting and exciting, that the viewer could come and bring something to the experience of themselves. So I would try to just make these expressions as relaxed as possible without a lot of obvious emotion. And then as I'm painting it, you know how it is when you're painting, you kind of get involved in one area and then you're over here and you're not really taking it in the way from a 30,000 foot distance. You're kind of involved in the specifics, and then you step back and you see what it is. So that's what would happen. And because the original composition, the facial expression wasn't so forceful, and I liked leaving it ambiguous, it could kind of reveal itself to me as I was going along, and I could be responding to it as I'm painting it. So it's like I'm in a conversation with my own painting, which also happened to me years ago. I was painting a portrait of one of my boyfriends at the time, and his face, we were in a fight. I mean, in real life, we're in a fight, and I'm painting him, and like that fight was showing up in the painting, And in the painting, he just was sitting there looking at me. It wasn't anything. But I thought that that was such an interesting part of the creative process, was like this communication with this inanimate object that starts to come to life before your eyes. And that actually helps me carry through and kind of imbue the painting with some emotion, as opposed to trying to put it there on purpose.
Mhm.
So a good example is the one in the window and that painting are of the same portrait, but I think the expressions are different. But they're the exact same, from the exact same source material.
Mhm.
So, I mean, you can't see that one, it's facing the wrong way, but if you look at that one closer, you see it's a little bit of a different expression. But yeah, so I like to allow that to appear, but the color, that to me is, like, I figure that out before I start, and I stay very close to my plan with color.
Mhm.
And I feel like that's that's the thing I really hold on to in terms of
And how do you
organizing it.
think about color? I mean, are you
I
thinking
think
about
about
it as
color-
independent of, or as a tonal range, or as what is the?
I think about it in a triad. I think about the three colors are like characters in a play. So the composition might be the stage, but the colors are like, there's one dominant atmospheric color in all of these. There's one like major color that's affecting everything, and it's usually something that's kind of softer. And then there's like a secondary color that becomes like supporting actor, and then there's a wild card color that's just an accent that is coming through and staccatoing and like kind of energizing the whole thing and kind of causing all the trouble, I guess,
Mhm.
or action, or whatever you want to call it, the dynamic color.
When you're painting it, do they all show up at the same time, or does the crazy color come in later, or what's the,
I know I planned it before.
you plan it before?
So I think of that as like kind of almost the first thing that attracts me to the composition is the color.
Hmm.
It's very backwards, I think. I don't know if anybody is working like this, but I'm always attracted to, like, I want to make a green painting. What's green? I want it to be green, and then I think there's pink, and then there's going to be like poppy, just moments of poppy, it comes to me in these kinds of threes. And then what I used to do was try to find things in real life that had that palette already.
Mhm.
So in my bathtub series, it was like, there was like this greenish bathtub water and the neutrals of the tile and the walls. And then this flesh tone was that secondary color. And then I would have like red lipstick on and red nail polish. And I would just keep doing that over and over and over again until I figured out what I was interested in, what I was doing with color. And I started to do it on purpose more and complicate it a little bit more. So, but that's kind of how my mind starts with it.
Mhm.
But I like to have that.
You work from collage photographs, or photograph that you like do in Photoshop, or do
Yeah.
you collage this and then put that on? How do you construct the actual
Well,
set of images?
for these, I've been calling them flower heads lately, these flower head paintings. They have been heavily worked on in Photoshop before the painting process. So I have like a whole library full of photographs of leaves and flowers and trees and all of that stuff. And then I have all these pictures of heads. And then I'll take, a head that I might think is interesting, and then I'll just start throwing different flowers at it on top of it transparently, sometimes making certain parts of opaque and sometimes not. And it looks terrible for the longest time.
Mm.
And I'm just kind of moving things like puzzle pieces. And then something clicks. And it starts to look like, maybe there's something here. And then I'll start turning on the color. And then I'll start being like, okay, now I'll put the color that I originally was hoping for into it. And then something starts to ignite and catch fire. And then it becomes a whole process. But there's a lot of Photoshop that helps me in terms of composing and figuring out the color.
Mhm.
but it's not just, like, it's collage in layers, not just, stick a flower and then a face, and then there's opacities and transparencies, and then more opacities on top of it and other layers. So sometimes the figures actually have flowers painted on their skin first, in real life. Then I photograph them,
Oh,
and I photograph them with flowers
and
next to
you
them.
paint the
Yeah.
model with flowers on, you paint the flowers on your model.
Yeah, almost like tattoos.
Oh.
So paint
I
on
would
them.
say the one around the corner
Yeah.
would be that.
Yeah,
Thank
and Heather had them on her face too, and that's Heather and these two. And then I would have them holding flowers, and then I'd push them up against glass and have water in there, water in the shower and the glass and the flowers and the tattoos. And then I collage more flower, like transparent layers over top, and then play with the opacities there and cut them up and crop them and change them until it worked. But that became fun to like figure out that puzzle, you know?
Are you steaming up a shower
Mhm.
or are you steaming up a glass? So you're putting.
Shower.
You're
Yeah.
doing a whole shower.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, well, for these I have, yeah.
Yeah.
This one I actually worked from video. Actually, there's a few of these that I worked from video instead of photographs. So I would take these short videos so I could have a range of options in terms of moments. And then I can, even kind of create other layers of
So
patterns.
you
of
did a
steam.
video and then stopped it at that point, began
Yeah.
to still it.
Yeah, I just grab the screenshot and use it for this, and then grab another screenshot, use it for this part. But it just gives you more options, especially when water is moving and moving and moving. One image isn't enough. You need 20 or 50 or 1,000 to like get more interesting shapes and patterns. But for me, it's the puzzle of what makes interesting composition with all these little shapes.
Mhm.
And I don't really want to know what it's about yet.
Do you have those moments where you do your collages or whatever and think, why isn't this enough?
Yeah.
Like what's the need to go into a painting if
Because they'd
and
still
how
look
do you answer
terrible.
that?
They still look terrible. Like if I showed you the collage reference, it still doesn't, it's not that remarkable.
So the leap is to a painting where you can make it remarkable in some physical way.
Yeah, you can improve it. I mean, any painter that is working from a photograph, you know this, like the photo isn't that interesting. It just isn't as interesting as paint. It's just like the luminosity, the richness of the color, the evidence of your hand in it. All of that stuff is just still, for me anyway, much more exciting than looking at the flat, glossy photo. But the other problem with these references that I make is they don't really print that well. By the time I'm done with them, they're grainy, they look really over-processed. And so I can edit that out as I'm painting it and make it into something that looks a lot cleaner and brighter, less photoshopped.
I ask partly because there's the reasons you gave for going on to make a painting, which are what you can clean up, what you can make, sort of feel better or control it more or something like that. But do you suffer from a lingering anxiety that you're doing it for an audience that can't see that difference? And so that doubt,
I don't care what they can see. I feel like it's in me.
That's
like
interesting that would be enough to say, no, I'm doing this just for me.
Like I wouldn't be able to live with it if I knew it could be that much better. Like also don't you just know there's something that, oh man, that would be just a great juicy paint stroke right there. The photo can never do that. So it's like, oh, here's a nice little, juicy, yummy paint stroke. They can see that, maybe they won't, I don't think anybody could appreciate it as much as I would in the moment making it, you know, but that's okay, that's fine. I don't need everybody to get it all the time, 100%. I'm okay.
Yeah.
But it is for me, because like my reason for painting is to get to the next discovery.
Mm.
And I've always had this anxiety about not just what you were saying, but about not doing the thing that I know I want to do or I'm curious about, because maybe I won't get curious ever again if I don't do it.
Mm.
You know, it's like a train that's leaving, and if I don't go all and follow through all the way and execute all my intentions, then I won't get another chance.
So the process leading up to painting doesn't capture your curiosity. It sort of, it feels just more speculation or something. And then when you get into the act of painting, the deeper experience of curiosity shows up, or?
I think so.
Yeah. That's
Yeah,
interesting.
I think at first I am curious about the way the composition is gonna look.
Mhm.
And then I get curious about how it's gonna look in paint. But, I mean, that's flipped over throughout the years.
Mhm.
I think that might even change again. I think it is changing. As I get less and less interested in making things look like they're actually things that exist. You know, because then you can't be assigning paint strokes to something that doesn't exist yet, you know?
Mhm.
But for me, it's always about discovery. That's the thing I'm chasing, is the surprise. And it's okay if not many people are having that experience too, but I think people are, or they are enough. I think, are you? I don't know.
We're gonna take a quiz after.
I mean, for me, I'm always excited by artists who are constantly trying stuff that's new.
I think that the audience experience of a painting is sort of the opposite, in that they come to the thing whole, right? It's a finished work.
Right.
And then their process is an unraveling one. And they can unravel it as far as they wish to go, in terms of whether it's taking it all the way back to process and discovery and all of that stuff, or take it back in terms of, significance of things, resonant meanings and stuff like that. But it's sort of like they have the experience in front of them and then figure out what the hell just happened.
Right, and especially now, everybody needs to know how it's made. That's like the Instagram curse, is everybody needs to see the blank canvas and then the process. Do you notice that? More so than
Are you
ever.
talking about that instant, how some people paint, that's
Yeah.
super fast?
Yeah, or even just showing process shots. Everybody wants to know how did you do this? And now more than ever, I get these questions of how is it done? I never thought to ask that, back when I
Growing
was
up.
when I was like more just learning to paint or looking at paintings. It was almost like, don't ask that. Like, that's a secret, like that's private,
Wow.
but now it's more part of the experience of the viewer, that they want to know how it's made, and that can even make it more interesting for them, or less, I suppose.
I think that part of that is that it brings the viewer into the creative process, which is exciting to people, as opposed to, seeing something come fully formed that's just magical and strange and fabulous, and you kind of, you feel like you don't actually understand what it is you're looking at. So.
But isn't that the best part of making something, is that you're looking at something and you don't know how to do it yet?
Yeah, no, and that is the artist's process, but to not share that is, or, to be protective of that as though you're giving away state secrets is.
No, I don't think it's state secrets, but I think it's something you can't make a formula of, even though that's what people want.
Yeah.
they want to be like, okay, so step one, and if I just have this color ground, and then if I buy these brushes, and then if I use this medium, and what's that color, and if I use this linen, and then, follow these instructions, I can make this. And I feel like as soon as I figure out all of those steps to make any one of these paintings, then I have to start doing something else. Because for me, it's over. For me, it's like, okay, well, the mystery is solved, and now I want to get lost again and get back into a dark room where I don't know where the light switch is for a while and try to figure out what I'm doing.
Talk to me about this scale of your work. How do you choose the size of your canvases and stuff? They've obviously grown in some, since way back when and stuff. Is that
Well, some of them have been pretty big. Actually, the first one that you saw was a painting of my dad and my mom, and they were swimming, and my dad's in the foreground with his goggles.
Cool painting.
And that was pretty big. That was a pretty big painting. That was one of the biggest paintings I've ever made. But I think of the scale based on, a couple of things. How much I like the composition. And then also, it's just kind of an intuitive thing. I mean, I will actually use an overhead projector just to figure out the scale so that I can see, does this need to be more middle size, a little bigger? And I'll fuss over that size for a while. And that's where the projector comes in real handy.
So the difference between the painting you just described as your dad and mom, in terms of a large scale, large format, and these, and what is your language and your career and stuff like that, is that painting was pictorial.
Right.
And these are not. These bring you into a different kind of experience with, as we had said earlier, a broader range of experiences, the psychological, emotional, as well as compositional problems and surface problems and stuff of paint. So how do you're creating a kind of confrontation with the viewer, right? And you're bringing them in at a certain scale in which what they're confronting, and in some cases in this room, are larger people, right?
Yeah.
And then, in some cases I've seen where you're the same size. I mean, I have one that's basically a one-to-one relationship. But the ones where it's like you're bringing a person into a experience where they're diminished physically by the scale at which, a large face is looking at it. How do you?
Yeah, why did I do that?
Yeah.
I think partly I wanted to get away from the rest of the body. I think that was partly a way to solve that problem, because I didn't want to deal with the rest of the figure anymore because of the charged nature of the naked body. The nude females specifically started to become more problematic. And really where I was focusing more was in the face and the head, and the psychology of the person. And I didn't want to make a lot of little head paintings like this.
Life-size heads.
Right. But there's also something that frees you up when you expand the size of something, when you enlarge it. It does allow you to get more physical with the surface, because you're not, trying to make all these little tiny gestures with your hand. You can get into, nice big brushes, make a nice big cheekbone or something like that,
Sure.
So that just was kind of an intuitive choice. But I probably had seen a few big head paintings over the years and enjoyed them too. That it's like, hey, maybe I'll give that a try.
Well, before we turn it over to the audience to tear you apart, I want to ask you about the nude around the corner. You just said that, the complexity of the body, et cetera, et cetera. And I have to say, there's something about that painting that really creeps me out. And that's the underwear.
Yeah.
On a body that is, one, beautifully painted, beautifully preserved, et cetera, where the surprise of the painting comes from the relationship between the body and an older face, right? Which is, kind of a startling moment. And where the real private parts of the body aren't exposed at all. Why the underwear?
Why not?
Because it's weird.
Good.
It's like, it takes you into a level of discomfort that they have. It doesn't seem to be what you have as a viewer.
I think that's just perfect because they do have it and they're just hiding it all the time. Like these, of course, there are exhibitionists in the world, fine. But we feel a little more, together with our underwear on. We prefer to be a little bit clothed. And that's kind of like the thing. And yeah, it is. It's uncomfortable to be naked. And that's part of what the painting is about.
I'm glad I asked the question.
Because I did make that decision very, very specifically, where it was like, I asked Betsy, she's one of the painting, do you want your underwear on or off? And she's like, I want it on. And my rule with models is to have them be a collaborator with me and for them to feel as comfortable as possible. And so it's the truth telling of that experience with her. And I don't know, it just became like, and then when I went to paint it, I could definitely paint it out. But I was like, no, I want this to be a place where people are stuck. Like, why didn't she paint that out? Because that's what you would normally expect a painter to do. Why have this interruption, But I think it's just like a little bit of a rebellion against the male gaze kind of constantly naked women over and over and over again. And it's like sometimes
Like
you don't get to
like
see
there's
it.
something wrong with that.
It's just a little pushback saying maybe you don't get to see it this time.
But you don't see it anyway. I mean, that's the thing. If there was another angle that you chose, then of course it would be more clear why somebody was trying to not expose themselves, right?
Right.
But this is just so like there's nothing to see other than the curve of the butt.
Yeah.
And it's still, so it brings this other
It's just
level.
another
into
level
it.
of like, this is because she's gonna stand up at some point.
And the painting's not about standing up.
Well, it's
I mean, the
When you see
painting you take
when
at
you
the
see-
moment that it is
if you
captured.
see a woman
so-
from in real life, you see a woman from behind and you see her bare back, and you're like, oh my gosh, she's got nothing on. That's very excited. Then the second you see like a strap or like some kind of thing that hints that you know that she's not naked in the front, that's just like, oh no, she's got a shirt on, that's fine. There's like a little bit of a psychology there to it, where even though there's nothing to see, she is not a naked woman.
Mhm.
So it was kind of a way to have all of that flesh without having the, millionth and one naked woman again.
Yeah, I'm glad I asked. That's a really interesting answer and an interesting, complex thing. Part of the manner in which you paint comes from classicism, right? And so then you add onto classicism the nude, right? And you add an ambition that is also something that classicism can contain, which are the complex levels of experience and meanings and things like that. And you paint a painting that is on some level rejecting classicism in favor of a narrowness or a smallness or something, right? which is, for you, it's saying, no, this is about realism, this is real, right?
Well, I think that all of those classical paintings are not actually that real. They're idealized. They're a fantasy, and they're an imposed fantasy that women did not create, that men created, for men. And so as a woman painting in a classical way, like to just take that narrative back just a little bit, sometimes where I can, and kind of make it, like the essay that you wrote about my work early on was,
which I just happen to have here.
which you I read it over. I still love that essay so much because you picked up on something that I
No, I don't actually remember what
you don't remember, but I'm going to remind you.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know that it was what I was doing. I was just painting my experience.
Right.
But what you said was like, it's discomfiting was the word that you used because it was, my fantasy versus her needs. Like these portraits of this woman who was naked in a bathtub, it's like, her expression and her posture is kind of getting in the way of my fantasy of what I want to be seeing. She's not splayed out passive and, doing a come hither kind of look. She's got some psychology to her and she's not she's not having the greatest day. It's really what it looked like. And so there is this kind of conflict in the male viewer, and those were very specifically definitely addressed to the male viewer, where it's like, you can look, but that doesn't mean that I'm not gonna also give you a ton of baggage to deal with while you're looking. So yeah, you picked up on it really well, and I don't even know if I intended it.
No.
But yeah, it was absolutely something that I ran with. Yeah.
Do people have questions or, yes, there's one right there.
I want to talk about the underwear.
Okay.
I think the problem is not that she's wearing underwear, but that it's ugly underwear. If she were wearing a really pretty pair of cat pants, it'd be different. It'd be a whole other thing. When I was at art school, we had a model who was kind of sloppy and old, and he wore a jockstrap, but it was a dirty jockstrap. That's what
It was a what jockstrap?
dirty jockstrap.
Well,
Never
I mean,
washed jockstrap.
it would never have happened that my dear friend Betsy or myself would have put on pretty sexy lingerie and then taken pictures of each other to paint. That is not who we are as people. That is not anything I will ever do, unless it is to like do it in a way that's kind of seedy and weird and, that it's ripped and there's something wrong. But yeah, you're right. It's because it's basic. It's like basically the real kind of underwear that we actually wear, the kind that is invisible and doesn't have any seams and no flowers or textures, so it's comfortable. So yeah, that might be upsetting, but that's what's real. That's what's really happening, So that was the choice with that. Now I'm gonna have to make all these paintings with people in underwear. That's lovely.
Push the underwear angle. Anyone
anybody
else
have
with
any
a question?
Other questions?
You talk about starting with composition and color. But the meaning sometimes is obscure, and that there's a process of discovery.
Yeah.
So what I'm curious about is when you begin, what is in your mind? What is your intent? And does that change in the process of discovery?
So my intent is really just to tell the truth. Is to relay what I've learned and what I am experiencing as honestly as possible. Whatever, it's mostly like part of my emotional life, my psychological life, whatever I'm experiencing right now in my world.
Is there a specific feeling you're starting with that goes to composition and color?
I mean, yeah, sometimes, yeah. Yeah, I mean, and sometimes it's more just aesthetic, whatever I'm feeling. Yeah, I might have some synesthetic properties in my brain with color where some colors actually have personalities to me, which isn't really the definition of synesthesia, but it's like sort of a thing. So sometimes it's aesthetic, sometimes it's like, you know what, I want to make a really bright, hot pink colored painting because that to me is really powerful, and I'm feeling this power. But I try to keep it very open-ended and very, I'm cautious to project too much of a narrative on something, you know, because I feel like it can become heavy-handed and then have quotations around it. You know, early on when I was much younger and just finishing grad school, I made a few paintings that I was trying to orchestrate, like it was like a scene on a play, and there's a man walking, and there's a girl in a bed, and it just looked like, you know, I didn't really have any plan with it. It was just kind of curiously putting things in a room, and it was kind of fun, but it also didn't feel authentic. Whereas if I just trust my intuition and my gut, I get to have this experience of discovering what the truth is along the way as well. And it reveals itself to me. And I think that there are, like, most of my teachers in grad school would be really upset with me for saying this. Like, I don't think you're supposed to do it this way. But I like to do it this way because I feel like it's the most authentic experience of making something. You know, where you start with a loose idea, you start with an intention. You know, like, my brother passed away 6 months ago, and I spent the last couple of years caring for him, and that was my life. So I have no doubt that the work I'm going to be making for the near future is going to be very much influenced by that. I don't have to try. You know, it'll be what I'm learning and understanding about grief and about life and about how to create meaning from, you know, the experiences that you didn't want. And the process of evolving as a human, it's all going to be there in the work. And I can be kind of keeping my eye on that as it goes. And then I'll be pleasantly surprised years later when I'll go, oh yeah, well, obviously that's what that was. To me, that feels like a more authentic, and I know the word authentic is so overused, but it feels like a more honest way to come to creating something rather than trying so hard to control every bit of it along the way narratively. You know, I had the really good fortune of working on a TV show a few years ago. And I was shocked to find out that even on this show, they keep things pretty open-ended. Like, they're not script, you know, things are written out beforehand, but there's still so much flexibility in the final project. So that they were happy to let me come in and pull some strings and move things around and change things that actually affected the storyline of the whole season of that show. And meanwhile, like, different directors were coming in and putting their input in, and then the actors are going to interpret everything a certain way, so that the final art is something that is this collaborative effort, that is this, you know, unplanned surprise. And that to me feels like that's the best. So that's why I do it that way. Yeah, right.
Well, this is less a question than just a comment. The show is The Americans, by the way. Curious.
I'm glad you said that because I was dying to find out what
Season,
show she was talking
I don't know,
about.
season 6 or something like that? Or-
Yeah, in season 6.
Okay. So,
Did you see it?
but she is naked.
Yeah.
She's naked. She's naked. So yeah, she's wearing underwear, but she's naked, you know, psychologically. That's what. There's a big difference between what the artist's, you know, reaction to your work is. As somebody who's been surrounded by it more than most, is that the artists come in and they say, oh, how did she do that? What are her choices with this, that, and the other thing. The people, and also on the TV show, respond to it psychologically. They don't care about the paint handling. They look at the painting and they connect with it in some level. They're all naked. These are all emotions.
Right.
That's what you're painting.
Right.
You know,
That's the real vulnerability.
And yeah, there is a scrim, there is something over it and so on, which allows them to put themselves in there.
Right.
That's the reaction of people coming in. Now, artists have all different, you know, reactions and thoughts about the work,
Right.
and that's why I love artists. But that's not what was.
You're absolutely right, and I'm glad you said that, because it is the theme of the show, is this vulnerability, you know, where I called it where longing meets limits, which is, that's the point of our most vulnerable, you know, is when you really want something and you realize you absolutely will never have it. And you feel that rawness and that pain of never having that thing that you want. And I have
She's not
always
posing.
been, what?
And that, she's not, Betsy in the painting,
Yeah.
she's not posing.
Right,
That's the way she is, that's in her private moment.
right. And that's the idea, is to show that honesty of the whole experience, right? And I mean, you're right, it's more about, just because someone is naked doesn't mean they're vulnerable. And to be quite honest, the paintings, even my self-portraits where I'm nude, naked, I don't feel like that's revealing anything, because it's, that is not, that doesn't make me, I don't have to protect anything, there. It's protecting my longing, protecting what's meaningful to me.
Well,
So
most men don't see that as you, I mean, most women don't see that as you, women see that as them.
Right.
Men sometimes see that as you, in the paintings.
Right.
It's just the react, that's the
But it's
benefit of
it's
being in a gallery all day long, you get to see how
It's the
people react to a painting.
It's the vulnerability that allows us to connect to each other as human beings. That expression of vulnerability allows us to see each other, have compassion for each other, have empathy for each other, kindness towards each other. And that's what the paintings have been about since my mom died. That's really what the main purpose had become, was connection, and exposing that the most important thing in life is not perfection and achieving this greatness or whatever on your scale of to-do lists, checking all your boxes, but it is actually creating connection with others. And that satisfying experience of really being known, being seen, and seeing someone else and connecting to someone else. And it's only through our vulnerability that that's possible.
I really love how the paintings in the glass shower doors, the glass functions as a metaphor for the painting surface, but then at the same time, it is a painting surface, and then you can break through.
Right.
So I think that's a nice little, to see these, 4 paintings, and it just adds a lot to it. It's mysterious.
Thank you, yeah.
I have a question, which is, since you pour so much of yourself into these paintings, when do you know that it's done? Walk away.
So there's a feeling that I get when I'm finishing a painting that it's like coming to a climax and it's getting really, really exciting. It's coming to life and I'm supercharged, and it's like, wow, it's better than I thought. There's like kind of a dip in the middle where you start, you're like, wow, this is gonna be great. And then you go like, oh wow, what am I thinking? This is not gonna work. But I'm like, okay, well, just keep going, keep going a little bit more. And then towards the end, there's a crescendo. And it's not when the painting is finished. It's right before the painting is finished, right? It's gonna happen. When that stops, it's finished. And you have to be careful, because if you keep going and trying to chase that exciting moment, it starts to unravel. And so you have to know when to go, oh, it happened, the climax happened, and now it's time to get a new canvas.
Speaking of climax, I'm curious if you have new limits that you're longing for.
It's a great question. So I'm not longing for any limits. I think what you mean is there new things that I'm longing for now that I know the limits of the things I have longed for, right? And I do. And I was listening to a podcast, forgive me if I get a little teary, it's no big deal, it'll pass. But I was listening to a podcast this morning about someone with a silly tattoo, whatever the tattoo says, amor fati. And that means love your fate. And so the idea is that even though you didn't get what you wanted, didn't go the way you wanted it, it's that you come to not just accept the reality of what has been given to you, but that you open to the possibilities that are only possible because you didn't get what you wanted. So that's kind of what I'm longing for now, is to find the meaning, It's a great question. I'll think about that one more. Anybody else have, yeah?
Do you think especially with the title, Where Volume Meets Limits, that also plays into all the layers in the paintings? Like, I'm thinking of the one right behind you, like, there's a layer of the glass and the water and everything, and there is a sense of longing because you're not right there, there's stuff in the middle, and that's the limit, like, you kind of see that too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, all of these layers that are obfuscating the subject between you and seeing what you want to see, and they're a form of limits. Yeah, it's all about recognizing. Each one of these is about recognizing that you can't have everything, you can't control everything, you can't possibly even know what there is to know because there's just too much unknowable, and to get used to that and accept it and stop fighting against it, because the more you struggle against that, the more you miss your own life. You can't experience what's really here because you're trying so hard to control what's not. If that makes any sense. Yeah.
Testosterone makes men admire the female form. It's the expression of the universe's creative juice on the planet. But it's that admiration that makes women feel objectified. How do we solve that problem?
Well, I don't think that anything needs to be removed. I think just one thing needs to be added. And it's like a combination of respect and empathy. And once that's part of the conversation, then you can have almost anything. Because, women also like to be admired and we like to be beautiful and enjoyed, but it's when our own psychology is not part of that, or if it's ignored, or if it's trying to be manipulated or controlled, then that's the problem. So
because you feel intimidated by the admiration sometimes, I think, outside of a comfortable.
you can feel outright terrified by it, to be honest. You can feel outright terrified.
I understand why.
You know?
It's just how it's expressed in so many different ways, but then it's kind of nasty, it's kind of demonized en masse.
Well, I don't think it should be. I don't think that's the right answer, is for it to be demonized. I think that it's just a matter for both men and women to have room to learn and grow and empathize with each other, respect each other, listen to each other, and then go from there. That's it.
That's right, on a one-on-one individual relationship level, how it's portrayed in the media and all the themes in the media, the media doesn't have that.
Well, that's kind of an unnecessary thing. You can just ignore all that. The media doesn't matter. It's what happens between people that matters. The media, what are we gonna do? Forget it. What else? Did you have a question?
Yeah, I recently viewed one of your TED Talks on YouTube, and it was the one where your mom was sick and then she died, and your work went in this other direction.
Yeah.
How did you trust, the process, so to speak, and how did you push yourself to keep going? Because it seemed like things just got really upside down for you, and your work went to this new place.
Well, at that point, I actually decided I wasn't going to be a painter anymore. So I really just stopped. I mentally detached from my identity of being as being an artist, because what had happened was so life-changing for me, and it just made that part of me so irrelevant. It was almost like, oh, that little girl is gone, and so I was like, I'm just not going to do it anymore. It wasn't working and I didn't want to do it. So I went on a trip out into the woods, and I thought, well, it might be fun to bring some paints and some canvas, but not paint my paintings, just mess around with paint. And so I was just messing around with it and throwing medium on and dripping things, and started to just, like a little kid playing with things, and I started to see trees and landscape, and I was like, maybe I like this. But I wouldn't say I trusted it. I think I was just kind of like, this does not matter. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter that much. And I think that that is actually the best way to start any creative process, is to understand that the stakes are really not that high, that it really doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. To be honest, if you don't have some kind of benign detachment to what you're making, you can't actually make anything new, because there's no room. You know, if you don't have the room to let it all get messed up, then there's no room for it to be something that no one's ever seen before. You know, you just have to have that. It's not even trust, it's just understanding that there's nothing really, there's only one way to do it. And if you don't do it with some acceptance of risk, then you're not gonna be able to do it anyway. So just allow for that 30 to 60% failure in there. And there's a lot of paintings that are not hanging on this wall that I have made too, you know, that aren't that great. So yeah, I wouldn't say I trusted it, but I was curious. So, and I didn't think I had much to lose. Yeah.
You ever see yourself completely breaking away from photos?
Yeah, I do.
Like after this?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I want to try that. There's something that I like about having the ability, mostly Photoshop, I think, is what's fun about it, is not so much the photograph of something, but the ability to mess with the filters and the colors in such an immediate way that I can see, like, oh wow, if I charge it the pink this much and make the green go this pale, it's so fast. It can show me relationships and colors that I can do so much faster. So I could see myself getting rid of the photographic image, but like kind of keeping the Photoshop part of it, because that's been a really fun tool. But I don't know. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for all of this. The work is beautiful.
Thank you.
But I do have a couple of strategic questions.
Okay.
One of them is about the relationship of the lens to the subject, which seems quite consistent in a lot of these pieces. There's this very presentation in terms of, I'm pretty, look at this part of my body from this distance presentation. And so I'm interested in whether or not you played or are considering playing with changing the orientation of the viewer, which is us, to the site. Either getting much closer or further away, or seeing the unique positionings in a more distorted space, if there's more space between the subject and the viewer. I'm just tossing this out only because I see that frontal presentation and wonder when you talk about abstraction, distortion, that's something that informs maybe a grittier way of looking at something and making it more ambiguous, since that seems to be something we're searching for.
Yeah, I have a few pieces. I have a lot of other pieces that do that. You know, back views, views from the bottom, views from overhead. I did a ton of aerial views for a while. I did underwater pictures where you're looking up at the reflection coming back. I mean, I've done a lot of it, and I think for me, I feel exhausted by a lot of it. So I don't know what's left, but there was something that simplified the problem of collage by just keeping it frontal. I mean, in profiles, there's a lot of profiles here. Thank you. Eric and Dan?
I don't, I'm getting a great education here, so that's fabulous, but
I wish we could talk
also
about
for,
your paintings. I want to talk about your paintings.
Un autre fois. For those who, in the audience who aren't artists, I hope you walk away with an understanding of the level of complexity and doubt and questioning and, you know, curiosities and experimentation and, that place that artists inhabit, which is one of uncertainty. And, paintings are the result of sort of dealing with that process on a continual basis. And I think you articulated it beautifully, how how you conceive of something that isn't apparent on at the first look of it, but as clear as it unfolds and stuff. So very enriching. So, anyway, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.